me in giving a very warm welcome indeed to Mr. Shawn Layden, the managing partner of the Odysseus Partnership.
Anyway, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out today. Thanks to the organizers and Abu Dhabi Gaming for putting us on the show today. It's a real special occasion for me to have a chance to speak to everybody here. This is my first time in the Middle East, first time to come out and speak to the community out here. And I want to share with you some of my thoughts on the future of gaming. That's why they brought me out here. You can see from the title, no one is coming to save you. I know it sounds kind of grim, but we'll get to a happy ending before this thing is all over to explain why that's actually a message of action, a message for encouragement for all of you. The future of gaming, such as we know it, look, I was first brought into gaming back in 1995, before your parents were born. And it was a time of great excitement at Sony. I'd been in Sony for about 8 years at the time in Japan. And a gentleman named Terry Tokunaka came up to me when I was working there. And he said, hey, Shawn, we're starting this new company called Sony Computer Entertainment. And why don't you come and work with us? And I said, well, that's great. What does that mean? He said, we're going to get in the video game business. We're going to take on Nintendo. We're going to take on Sega. And I think you'd really have a value to add to that proposition. I said, Tokunaka-san, I don't know anything about video gaming back in 1995. And he said, don't worry, none of us do. We just have a great compact disc technology, we have an operating system, and we're going to go make a platform called PlayStation and try to drive the video game business to greater and greater heights. So, as most of my career was based on one phrase and one phrase only, how hard could it be? I just said, okay, I will join PlayStation production, I'll join the PlayStation group, Sony Computer Entertainment. But I asked Tokunaka-san, but what am I going to do when I go there? He said, you're going to be a game producer. I said, great. What does a game producer do? And he said, we're going to figure that out. So back in 95 in Japan, we began the PlayStation business. The corporate heads at Sony were really kind of ambivalent about getting into the game business. They saw Sega and Nintendo as two huge giants that couldn't be taken down. But Sony's going to get into this. Crazy Ken Kutaragi, the father of PlayStation, was bloody-minded about doing it. And so we entered the business. Now, one of the key differentials that Sony brought to the game business back at the time is that Sony Computer Entertainment was a subsidiary of Sony Corp, but it was actually a joint venture between Sony Electronics and Sony Music Entertainment, Asia's largest record label. And that was the key element, I think, at the beginning that helped us be successful, insofar as we needed to get the music guys in because us hardware guys didn't understand what entertainment really meant. So that's why in the first iteration of PlayStation, maybe many of you saw this happen. The whole advertising program, the marketing program was completely different than what Nintendo and Sega were doing at the time. Nintendo would say, here's Mario, and Sega would go, here's Sonic. And Sony ads for PlayStation 1 were mysterious and weird. Often you didn't even see the game in the ad. You just got a feeling for what the game was like. Those are the music guys, because they knew how that worked in the music field. We turned game developers into rock stars. We put their names on the front of the box, where Nintendo and Sega never did that. We knew that the entertainment was going to be driven by the talent. And keep that in mind, talent. That's the important thing we're talking about here, and we'll get back to that towards the end. Latterly in my career, they asked me, we want you to be a game producer and bring Western games to Japan. You can imagine how impossible that was in a country that had Square and Namco and Bandai making games like Ridge Racer, Tekken, and Final Fantasy. I'm bringing American games to Japan. The Japanese not too keen on Twisted Metal and NHL 97. It was really hard to sell those games there, but it was a good showing that gaming was going to be global. It wasn't going to be just a Japanese thing. The Western companies would get better over time, and people like EA, Activision, and Take-Two have shown that the Westerners can make great games as well. But back in the day, we were learning about how to do that. Around 1999, they asked me, Shawn, I want you to go to Europe and make an acquisition for a game studio. So Sony bought a company called Psygnosis, which most of you probably don't remember. But we went there to buy that. I'd never done an acquisition before. But again, that phrase, how hard could it be, came to mind. We went to England, we bought Psygnosis, we got games like Destruction Derby and Wipeout and Formula One. And we really started to understand the global integration of this business, how important having talent in Europe for the European market, America for America, and Japan for Japan. Later in my career, they sent me back to Tokyo and wanted me to do sales and marketing. for PlayStation in Asia. I was the first non-Japanese to run a Japanese domestic company because at that time we had just launched PlayStation 3. Now, PlayStation 1 was a surprise success. PlayStation 2 was a vigorous success. And PlayStation 3 almost killed the company. $600 for a console was a lot of money. The crazy cell processor architecture, which we don't have anymore, but we had then, made it extremely difficult to build games for that. And Sony almost lost the plot. Kutaragi-san was very keen on calling PlayStation 3 a supercomputer. You could run Linux on it. He wanted it to take over the entire computing activities in anyone's household. But it was too expensive, and the vision was too dispersed over, is it a game machine, is it a video machine, is it a supercomputer? So with PlayStation 4, we made the conscious decision that we're just going to build a game machine. PS4 is a game machine, and it's a game machine. And beyond that, it's a game machine. We decided that's where we're going to lean into, and we came back from the brink of ultimate disaster. If people understand what the story of Icarus was, PlayStation 3 was Sony's Icarus moment in gaming. Got too close to the sun, burned our wings. But we came back. We came back to first principles. We had the talent to build the games. You know, we always talk about gaming hardware. And whether it's a gaming hardware, whether it's a Blu-ray player or a compact disc player, no one buys these devices because they want to have more plastic and glass in their living room. They buy these devices because they want a route to the content. And that's the most important part. It's all about the games. It's all about the enjoyment and the entertainment. So PS4, as you guys may know, reasonably successful. We'd already driven Sega out of the market, pretty much left Microsoft on the carpet, and we continued to move forward. And we went from games on PS1 like Crash Bandicoot to PlayStation 4, games like Uncharted, strangely enough from the same studio, Naughty Dog. They began with platform games and came up with The Last of Us, which arguably is the most emotional game in the console business. And then laterly, we managed to make it into a TV show for HBO, one of the first successful crossovers from gaming IP into linear entertainment, movies and TV, that kind of thing. But that's the same studio, Naughty Dog, who had done that. So over time, they were able to achieve those things. Also over time, you know, I think the budget for Crash Bandicoot, which is a big piece of PlayStation 1 game, was something like $4 million to make a game like that. And sold it for $59.99. A game like Last of Us costs you triple-digit millions, $120, $140 million. It just goes to show that to build the games bigger, better, and more amazing, there's a huge cost associated with that. Now, those in the business room, you understand that profitability is revenue minus cost is profit, or operating income. Now, if your revenue is based on selling units of software, and let's say you can charge $59.99 in America, but it only costs you $4 million to make it, but $59.99 against 20 million units, there's a huge profit slice there. The problem happening in the gaming industry now is that we spend $150 million, or some people say like GTA 6 probably costs $1 billion to make. But you can largely only charge $59.99 or $69.99 a unit, but the cost against that is huge. So what happens? Profitability disappears. And breaking even is extremely hard. And when that happens, companies begin to lose their nerve. If you're making a game that's triple-digit $1 million to make and you understand how that profitability curve works, your risk tolerance goes to zero. You feel you have to do the sure thing. So instead of trying something completely new and different, you do something 5, something 6. You keep on that trajectory and you keep making more Assassin's Creed, more Call of Duty, more Need for Speed, more Spider-Man. Which is fine, you know, amazing games. People really enjoy it. It's a big risk for the companies, but they can map that against prior performance of these titles and say, okay, we think we can make our money back on that. But the real problem is, if risk tolerance goes to zero, new creative also goes to zero. Breaking new IP or having new experiences or new titles. Back on PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2, those of you old enough to remember that, we had games for everybody. Sure, you had like Resident Evil and you had Crash Bandicoot or you had The Last Guardian. But you also had games like Parappa the Rapper. You know, rhythm action gaming was invented by PlayStation with this little two-dimensional dog doing rap songs with a onion sensei and a school bus driver. My worry is that in today's world, those games don't get made anymore because the big publishers don't see the profitability being worth the effort. They'd rather do the big dice roll and go for the big hits and do another Far Cry or do another God of War. So what happens there is you have a bifurcated game market where you have the big blockbusters on the top, you have the AAA, the indie stuff on the bottom, and that middle is gone. Now this phenomenon has also occurred in the movie business, right? There's a time you had big movies, then you had that middle space was like Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep live on a houseboat with a shaggy dog and adventures happen. And then you have like Sundance, the really like independent film that can be really strange or really interesting. In the movie business as well, that entire centerpiece went away. You can't go to theaters now and see those kinds of human dramas. No one's making On Golden Pond anymore. But those TV shows and movies had a place to go. They went to Hulu, they went to Netflix, they went to Amazon or Apple Plus or Disney Plus. But in the game industry, that centerpiece didn't have any place to go. There are people here in this room, I'm sure, who remember publishers like Acclaim or THQ or Interplay or Psygnosis, Gremlin, Ocean, Infogram. They've all disappeared because they were making their life in that we call AA space. And they couldn't level up enough to be in the world of God of War and Call of Duty, and their cost structure didn't allow them to do the independent stuff, which has a lower cost point, so you can, it's only a team of 20 people, you can do that. So what we've lost is variety, we've lost diversity, we've lost breadth of field for the gaming industry. And I think it's important for us to take some time. There's some people here, I'm sure, that are game developers or investing in game developers. The future is going to be reconnecting that centerpiece of the gaming spectrum. That somewhere between, Grand Theft Auto and Balatro, what is in that centerpiece? And how do we get that back? Or else we're going to be in a world where we're just playing Fortnite, GTA, and FIFA for the rest of our lives. And that's going to take all the energy out of this business. So when I say no one's coming to save you, that's my message to the independent game development community. There was a time as a developer, you work really hard, you get your demo done, you send it off to Activision, you send it off to Electronic Arts, you send it off to Microsoft or Sony, and hope they would say, hey, that's amazing, why don't you come in, let's take a pitch, let's talk about your product. They're not doing that anymore. They've become too large. They are too big now. They can barely hold their own stuff together. So coming into them and having them give you a leg up into the marketplace is not a reasonable expectation anymore. No one's coming to save you, so you've got to do it yourself. You have to be the main participant in your own salvation. You cannot wait for others. But that's why the future is for the builders. If you can go into it now and have your vision and your plan about the game you want to create, look at the market, look at how you reach out there. I was just talking to a gentleman earlier who's here who works a lot of influencer marketing in the business. That is where the key is going to happen. The other problem with these large giants, like the Activisions and the EAs and the Sonys, is that they only know how to market one way, which is the old way, which is you have a huge marketing budget, you buy a lot of advertising, and on launch day, you shoot all that marketing money into the atmosphere and hope it turns into something. But we know now marketing for games has to be done differently. You can't go into stealth mode for 7 years and come out with a game and surprise the world. You have to engage with your fans, like while you're building it. You have to make your fans feel that they have some insight into what's happening in your activity, and they are a participant in that. You're getting feedback from fans. You're putting up, proto art. You're putting up, placeholder art, and people can react to that, and you can get an idea of what they're interested in. You have to create that, reduce the gap between the game creator and the game fan. Move that more closely. Right now, the interstitial is huge game publishers that make that hard. And that's what's really slowing down the ability for new people to get into the marketplace. You have to come at your marketing differently. You have to not ask for $120 million budget for your game because you're not going to get that. So how do you reduce the cost of the game development? Has anyone here seen the movie Flow? It won Best Animated Feature this spring at the Oscars, beating out Pixar, beating out Universal Animation, beating out DreamWorks. And it was made, I believe, in Eastern Europe. It was made largely with freeware tools or very inexpensive tools. If you saw the movie, I think you'll agree when I say the graphic quality of Flow is pretty much PlayStation 2, but it was hugely successful because it's not about the graphic, it's about the story. It's not about the whiz-bang, ray tracing, how many teraflops you can push through it. It's about, do we love this cat? Do we want to see what happens to this cat? And tell me that story. The director famously said, because it's not photorealistic, you can see pretty much all the texture maps in that movie, but he said he wasn't going for realism, he was going for naturalism. Could you believe that was a cat? In AAA gaming, in the high-end gaming, we spend a lot of time chasing photorealism, trying to get across that uncanny valley where it looks just like a movie. And that's really expensive to do that. And it doesn't pay dividends in and of itself. If the story's not compelling, it doesn't matter how shiny it is. If the characters are boring, it doesn't matter how many articulations in their skeleton you can do in your animation model. Get back to first principles. Get back to understanding you're there to create an entertainment. You're not there to do a technological exercise. You're there to create something that people want to live in your world for a certain amount of time. And they want to see what your vision was, what your story is, and what your characters do. Believe in that. Believe in that mission. And also believe that the people you're making your games for, particularly in this industry, in the gaming industry, gaming fans are the best fans in the world. They have knowledge and understanding of what we're doing. They have a desire to see us successful. They want us all to succeed in making games. And so believe in that and lean into that. And no one's going to come to save you. So you have to save yourself. There's another panel we're doing this afternoon where I'll talk a bit more about how do you do that? How do you create a center of energy where you can possibly take your teams, build your games, and get seen? Because the other challenge, the huge challenge, particularly in independent gaming, when you go onto Steam, the big challenge now is discovery. Can you find the game you want? With the decline of brick and mortar, the GameStops and electronics boutique, we don't have any retail places we can go and talk to a knowledgeable person and they say, so what kind of games do you like? Well, I'm kind of into RPGs. And, well, have you looked at this? Have you looked at this? You have to do it all on your own now to find out what's going on. So we need to find different ways to solve for that problem. But again, if you're a developer, there's a possibility for you, there's an opportunity for you if you have that vision and that drive to get the thing done. The second thing I'll say, because I'm running out of time, please, God Almighty, stop making 100-hour games. When the average age of gamers was 16 to 18, yeah, you have time, you have no money, so you can just play games forever. With the average age of gamers now in their 30s, we may not be rich, but we're definitely time poor. So give me games I can finish. Only 30% of gamers actually see the end of most of these large games, which means 70% of the people who buy these huge AAA games don't even see the last level, which I paid $20 million to build. So keep that in mind. Keep your ideas tight. Keep your bands tighter. And understand the opportunity is out there, but you've got to get it for yourself. You must be the key instrument in your own salvation and your own success. And lean on each other and help each other, because all of us want you to be successful. I want you to be successful, because I haven't spent 30 years of my life in this industry just to end up, we're just playing Fortnite and Call of Duty. Please, God, help me with that. I know we're kind of tight on time, so I'm going to wrap it up here. I'll be at the show. I'd like to talk to anybody who wants to get a little bit deeper into what we're doing and tell me what you're doing. The last thing I'll say, and I say this with every presentation I do, to get more people playing games, the industry needs more people making games. And when I say more people, I mean people who don't look like me. stop counting on the West Coast of America to create all the games you play. I want to see more games coming out of Europe. I want to see games coming out of the Middle East, Southeast, in Africa. This is what the great opportunity of the future is. So much of this planet is an untapped resource for game development. A lot of it's here. That's why I'll be spending more time in this part of the world to see how we can get everybody to participate in this really exciting world of video gaming. And with that, thank you for your time. Enjoy the day.